Hi, everybody. My name is Rennae Stubbs. I will be the moderator of this beautiful panel. Just really quickly before I get started, I would just like to, on behalf of Axios and also Deep Blue, of course, if you are over on that side, we would just like you to try and keep your voices down just slightly, just because the panel over here are sort of being listened to by you guys who are in your seats. So just if you do go back that side, if you could just make sure we love the networking that's going on over there, but just be cognizant of your voices. Okay, bookwork out of the way. Okay, so this is a global look at women's sports, and I am joined by some fantastic panelists here. Sorry, Kelsey, you're the only American on this, so you're going to hear some very different accents finally, right? So right here on my right is Zarah Kudcy. Zarah, you know what? I'm going to let you guys tell everyone what you do. So, of course, Mel Jones to her right, and Therese O'Higgins in the third chair over there, and of course Kelsey, Trainor over there on the end. Okay, so I want to start by, first of all, just letting everybody know sort of how you got into sports in the first place, and then what you are currently embarking on right now.
Well, 22 years ago, I was actually the ground staff for a tournament that you played in. So I would mow the lawn and sweep the rain off at one of your tournaments. So that's kind of like an entry point.
Wow, okay, great job.
But I mean, I've been in a few different sports. Mel and I have actually worked together when I was on Cricket World Cup. But I joined Chelsea Football Club last year from Formula One. With the remit to build the business out around the women's team. Super successful on the pitch. Apologies, I am going to use the term football for the next 23 minutes. And also not very happy that we're losing our head coach to all of you. But you're inheriting a great person, and one of the big reasons that I joined Chelsea, because the work that she's done on the pitch is what myself and Carly, who's here as well, want to reflect in our off-the-pitch business work.
I fell in love with a sport that you can play for 5 days and you don't have a winner. So if you can understand that, come and speak to me. Grew up in Australia. Australia was, back in the 70s and 80s, quite a white-looking country. The West Indian men's cricket team used to tour Australia. And I went, I look like them. I love these guys. I need to play this sport. So got involved in cricket, played with the national team. Never got paid to play for Australia. We even got billeted at times when we were travelling. Got through that era, then got dropped from the team and asked to commentate over in England. And I said, why would I want to commentate on a team I want to be playing in? And they said, we're going to pay you 300 quid. And I said, tell me where, when and what to wear. And that was my first ever introduction into commentary. So I transitioned full-time commentary now about 5 years ago, working on men's and women's international events around the world, leading into the T20 Men's World Cup, which is here in the States starting in June. So between that, and I'm also here, I can't actually see them at the moment, two other Aussie mates. We're setting up a business for women in sport, personal development immersion tours that we want to bring here to the States as well. So hence the reason I'm in the room in a sense, that big build into women's sport, but also to talk about women in media.
Yeah, and I think I fell in love with Billie Jean King. I did actually play sports when I was younger, being 6 foot at the age of 13 in the west of Ireland. There wasn't much choice. I was like, you know what you're going to do? And then kind of put my head down for many years and worked in consulting and was fortunate enough to meet Billie Jean and Alana when they were getting out of World Team Tennis and selling that. I was kind of surprised on a couple of things, that they just put their heads down and been solely focused on building this league where men and women, and I think it'll likely be the future in a few years. Rennae might talk about that at another point, but you know, the just great legacy that she has, and how it could translate across multiple other arenas, and the incredible relationships she had with corporations, and how we could use that to shine a light and lift up multiple other sporting properties and entities. So I'm part of the team now that's growing Billie Jean King Enterprises for the past 10 years, and also working across her foundation, where she gives significantly to sports, education, activism, 3 pillars that change the course of her life.
So I wish I had a cool story about Rennae or Billie Jean King, but I'm just from Philadelphia, so sports are... Go Birds! Sports are just ingrained in all of us, and I run strategy for Rob McElhenney's More Better Industries, and more specifically work on Wrexham AFC, and then even more specifically Wrexham AFC Women.
Yeah, see? They love you. So I want to ask all of you, just real briefly, because we only have 20 minutes here, but the collective experience, what do you think the US market, particularly advertising, media, can take from the experiences of international love of sports? For example, the Matildas in Australia sell out the original tickets. They had to expand the amount of seats that they had. They had to go to different places. The numbers were off the charts on television. What do you think that the international audience can teach advertisers and brands here in the US that they're not taking advantage of? I'll go down the line.
I don't know if it's about teaching. I think there's two things. One is the opportunity for growth. So there's a lot of men's international tournaments coming to the US and club events in the next 3 or 4 years, and hopefully a Women's World Cup as well. We'll find out next month. But if you look at the 1 in 3, I think it was UEFA did a study that 1 in 3 new fans to women's football are actually new fans to football, period. Which in the UK for us is a huge thing because the men's game is arguably at a saturation point and now we've got new fans coming in. And I think even more interesting is 31% have yet to pick their team that they're going to support and 40% are likely to support more than one team. So if you think about this huge audience that we've got, that we're tapping into in the UK and Europe, and we're about to bring them over to the US for the international tournaments that are here. You know, Chelsea women, we will come and play in the US for a pre-season tour in August, hopefully with a team that you might know not too far from here, maybe Gotham. But I think that's what we're looking about, how do we bring that? But in reverse, and to your question, we're actually learning a lot from the US. So, you know, women's football or soccer has been much more mature and advanced than it has in the UK for a long time. So we've tapped into, I think this morning, you know, in the opening creds where Jess Smith talked about building partnerships with purpose, we've taken that into all the work we're doing at Chelsea Women. So we've quadrupled our women's only revenue this year because everything had a purpose attached to it. We've got partners that help with fan away travel. We've got partners that make sure our academy kids can get to the training facilities by providing cars for them. So I think that's definitely something we learned from Angel and took into what we do.
Yeah, actually, Kelsey, why don't I go down to you there? Because with Wrexham FC, we all know the greatness of Netflix and what they've done for that club in general. Of course, you have great owners as well. Just tie into what Zarah was saying there about the importance of advertising, storytelling, etc.
Disney will have my head if I don't say Hulu and not Netflix.
Excuse me, you're right. FX, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. I mean, listen, I think marketing, right? You're trying to sell something to people, and when you look at the global scale of it and what Wrexham has been able to do is to connect humanity through storytelling, and then you really get authentic partnerships. I think that's what's been so fun and exciting about this magical platform that is Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney is the ability to get the message out to a larger audience in really, really interesting ways through organic storytelling. And through that, I mean, we're coming to the U.S., our men's and our women's team, thanks to Ally Bank, are coming to the U.S. this summer. And honestly, the ability to tell that story on a global platform and incorporate our partners into it through very, very organic ways has led to massive opportunities and has changed an entire community in Wales.
How are you two working together?
We call each other up a lot. No, I mean, in talking to Chelsea and really understanding they're a massive global brand, Wrexham looks to be that. We communicate all the time because when you have amazing people with ownership groups and people who are willing to invest in the women's side, it's really just about, hey, can we get creative? Can we do things together if the opportunity presents itself? We are a semi-pro team at Wrexham on our women's side, but someday we'll be competing against Chelsea.
But I think also just to toot Kelsey's horn a little bit, I think some of the partnerships that she's done with Wrexham Women actually, even though they are semi-pro, are helping us to drive the value up of our partnerships. And I think lifting the sort of the floor of the commercial value is one of the biggest challenges that we have. Because, you know, I've been in rooms where we've had to, or we've been compared to men's Premier League teams that are in the bottom 3 and asked why would we spend more with Chelsea Women when we could get the front of shirt with a bottom club at the Premier League. And I said, well, that's fine if it's a media buy. I agree with you, do the Premier League club. But if it's about talking about innovation, leadership, like authentic storytelling, we do have the numbers, but it's a very different story proposition that you've got. But I think that's a big piece that Kelsey and Wrexham have helped us with.
So, Teresa, from your standpoint with the Billie Jean King Cup, which is played by every country around the world, just so you know, it's the involvement of the Billie Jean King Cup is synonymous. You want to be on the Australian team, you want to be on the American team. That's so important to represent your country. But from your standpoint, selling that 1 week in particular in Seville this year, for example, how important is it brands to you and sponsorship, and how does having Billie Jean King on your side help you in those moments?
I mean, massively, but I will say, just back to the earlier point about what the US can learn from, you know, more of a global market, is to think like a global company, even if you are only focused on the US market, because people see your brand all over. And, you know, we're talking to some brand partners now and they, oh yeah, no, we're only at the US Open. It's like, the best players in the world are going to be in Seville. The players that will cost you 20 times more to be involved with the US Open are going to be at the Billie Jean King Cup. So if you can just get outside of your zone of only being focused on one event, one marketplace, it pays dividend in the long run. And just a note on sponsors, to be associated with the Billie Jean King Cup is not just, you know, thinking about tennis. It's a massive global platform for a conversation about gender equality, for the, you know, the greatest who has moved the needle for women's sports, not just tennis, Billie Jean, and all of the things around that. It's the highest purse money for any team, women's team sport, that's made possible by sponsors. And again, just thinking about like authentic sponsorship, the likes of Gamebridge that said, you know, we're going to show up in women's sports, we're going to ensure that we recognize the legends of the sports like Annika Sorensen for the Annika Cup, we're going to give the highest purse for LPGA, and for Billie Jean, the highest purse that feeds tennis across 135 nations and ensures that the winning team can take home $2 million. So that's, to me, is the bridge of, you know, applying a global mindset and also knowing that you can move the needle by virtue of your sponsorship dollars.
Yeah, I didn't have that prize money when I was playing Fed Cup. Billie Jean Cup, I can tell you that. I would have played all the time. Mel, from a former athlete to going into television as well, how important is it for women to tell the stories of women's sports? And I think all of us can speak to that. But from your standpoint, how important is that to have women in the commentary box?
Yeah, not just in the commentary box for the women's game, but probably even more so for the men's game. So I can remember my first commentary gig was back in 2001, and the men in that commentary box were old school heroes of men's cricket, and I was a fangirl because these are the men I grew up watching, because we never saw women's cricket on TV, and it was like they were being punished, that they'd done something wrong, that they were in there commentating on a women's game. And I thought to myself, I'd never commentate again if that's going to be the space. And it's changed quite a bit. The first time that I was over in India for the Indian Men's Premier League, which is the biggest cricket tournament in the world. And I can remember going for the microphone for the first time to pretty much speak at the same time as one of the senior men. And I sort of, you know, balked a little bit, and he just went and gave me the okay. And it's moments like that in the commentary box where you just feel a little bit more emboldened to get your message across. And I think the biggest point that I've found in the commentary box, particularly with the guys, is the chat around language that we use. So cricket is a very old school sport. It started back in the 1700s. So they've used the words batsman for pretty much all their time. And now all of a sudden women's cricket is starting to get televised more. And all these girls come up to me and they were saying, but I'm not a man. So why are you using batsman? Because I'd use it because it was just the vernacular within the sport. That's a very good question. So we started using batter, and the backlash we would get from men in the commentary box or on social media saying, why do we have women in the commentary box? They're changing our sport. But they're starting to realise that we're changing it for the better because it's opening up the door for more and more young girls to come into the sport, for women to feel as if they're part of it. We've got a position in cricket called third man. We don't use that anymore. It's just the ball's been hit to third. And now all of a sudden cricket's feeling as if it's more and more of a sport for everyone to get engaged with. Equipment used to be in men's and boys' sizes. That's now changed to adult and youth. So when a young girl goes into a cricket store, she says, this gear's for me as well as my brother. And so it's those kinds of stories that you can start to tell on air as well, but also off air, with the guys to say, these are the reasons why it matters. And it takes a while to sort of get that messaging across, because in their head, they're still like, what does it care if you say batsman or man of the match instead of player of the match? And it takes some time, but gradually, and I must admit, my social media feed when we first started to do it was horrendous, with the commentary coming through to me, coming into this, who does she think she is, coming in trying to change hundreds of years of sport. And as the years have gone on, that has died down more and more, and now it's just like, she got her stats wrong, and I can handle that. That's a completely different thing. But we have changed the game immensely, so that now that women's World Cups, women's Premier Leagues in India can now flourish a little bit more and not have to worry about that backlash as much.
If I can just add a bit of context, that for those who don't know, Mel is one of the most respected cricket commentators I'm sure in Australia, but definitely in the UK. And I think it's a really important point that Mel makes about having her talking about men's cricket, not just women's cricket, because she's actually helped to normalise people hearing women talk about men's sport. So I just wanted to throw that out to you.
Yeah, well done.
So, jumping on that, what are you most optimistic about going into the next year or so with all of your respective companies, sports? I'll start with you down the end there, Kels, because you're the only American here. We'll let you go first.
I was going to say, it's so apparent that I have the least cool accent here. I don't know if we count Philadelphia as an accent, but...
Oh, it has an accent. It has an accent.
Honestly, I'm most excited, just probably across the industry, to see the zeros go up, to see the dollar signs keep getting bigger and bigger. I had started a brand, Invest in Women, a few years back. And it was really because, to Mel's point, language matters, right? The commentary, the words that we use, they get placed in your heads through marketing, through storytelling. And if we're not being precise and we're not being intentional about the language that we use, we end up in situations where we're still continuously fighting. So I'm just excited to see the dollar signs go up, really cool brands starting that aren't in the women's sports space start to come into it and throw those dollars in. We all know the return is there. We all know the impressions are there.
Kelsey, can I ask you real quick, is there one brand that's come to you that you're like, oh, I didn't expect that one? I mean, you don't have to say it if they haven't signed on the paper
No,
yet, but...
I mean, honestly, not yet. We tested out a partnership that has been so amazing, is so fun, with Ally bringing Wrexham women over to the U.S. this year. And shout out to Ally for really leading the way in pretty much everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But no, we're open for business, so.
So is the Billie Jean King Cup. But what I'm most excited for is kind of passing the mic and new platforms of media and storytelling. I think, especially in tennis, we're fortunate that it's broadcast across so many territories, 150 for the Billie Jean King Cup, but we want it to be in other audiences. Like, I see what the PWHL has done by going to YouTube, and that is accessibility. I want to see more and more of that, more, clips for social virality around women's sports. I just think there's so much more of an opportunity. We're on the starting point of it now, and this year in particular has been huge. And the videos that we've been showing here about the success of the WNBA draft, everything else, just more and more of that reaches people that actually wouldn't have been tuned into the sport that you're marketing previously, but are like, this is really important. I want to see these women shine.
Excited about seeing more women leaders in the decision-making space. I come from a very male-dominated sport, and the men in the sport absolutely love the women's game, but their lens has still come from 200 years of men's cricket, so their decisions aren't always in the best fit for the women's game. So the more and more women's leaders we get through there, the better stories we can tell as well. I've just been involved, well, it was secretly at the time, but we got the Afghanistan women's cricket team out when the Taliban took over, and they're now all in Australia and healthy and thriving, but everyone's forgotten about them. So how do we capture those stories and tell women's cricket, women's sports stories differently? And I think that engagement will just spin the wheel a lot more as well.
I'm going to be specific. Next 4 days, 4 months, and year. So in the next 4 days, I am excited that we will sell out Stamford Bridge, which is our main stadium, for the first time ever, for the Champions League semi-final against Barcelona. So I'll be equally excited if we knock them out too. Then in the next 4 months, we'll have our first new head coach in 12 years of the women's team, after Emma leaves us to join the US team. So and I think, and equally with that, coming to the US for pre-season. And then over the next year, it's super exciting in women's football at the moment because the clubs have all voted to take control of the 2 women's leagues we have, the WSL and the Women's Championship. And therefore, there's a real opportunity to build and grow on the foundations that have been set while it's been run by the FA, for the last 12, 13 years. So I think there's a real short and long-term excitement.
That's great. Okay, so we've got about 4.5 minutes left. So this is kind of a big question, but what resources, infrastructure is required for you guys to grow your specific sports and events? So 4 minutes, 15 seconds. You got to sell this now. Let's go.
No, honestly, at Wrexham, we come from a very privileged position. It's actually a fantastic case study of how to use privilege to add money and value to the women's sports space and the power of intentional storytelling. Season 2 was the first season where we had our women's team in it. And the way we told the story was not necessarily, let's be inspirational, let's focus fully on the sport, but it was the full human aspect of the storytelling. And because of that, people in the audience can now relate to our athletes and know their names. And that's a massive part of what we want to continue to do on the women's side.
I think just more and more brand partners that are thinking not just about tennis, but as I said earlier, about like pay equity, about gender equality, about women's sports as a platform and catalyst for change we want to see in business, in government, across the board, and leveraging what we have and the people that we're bringing to the table as that platform. And just the cross pollination of people who are in those positions. We have Malala Yousafzai now, for example, starting a women's sports fund. That is...
I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah, because she sees the exact correlation between women in sports and access to education and respect in society. So the more and more we can bring those people into the arenas and extend it, that's the kind of, resources that I want to keep leaning on and just bringing more and more people to the table.
I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. So if anyone loves the Australian accent, please come up and speak to me. But I really put it out there to anyone in the room who is keen on uplifting women to the next level, to getting rid of that imposter syndrome, to allowing them to really thrive in their space. That is what our business is about and what we're trying to build both here in Australia and the States, but also in England and around the world. These tours hopefully will expand. So if you think you're in that space and can help, come up and say g'day. G'day. I didn't even meet that, but there we go. G'day.
I think I'm going to touch on less of what we need and something that we've got. And I don't know if it's because I'm in America, but I'm going to shout out someone else. But it's sort of in the crowd. So Carly Telford retired from San Diego Wave last year, former Chelsea and England player, and joined our commercial team. And anyone that's looking to build out their business or their franchise, having a player in that decision-making piece is so important because we talk about authenticity, but she's still, having only just retired, connected enough to the team to actually know all the personalities, know who's important, like what's important to which player, how we can actually make the partnership stand up better, and also just be a voice. I tease her, she's the greatest salesperson because she's not selling. She believes in the team and she understands it. So I think that would be one thing that I would suggest to everyone.
Great. Okay, well, in the last little bit here, I just want to add my 2 cents and say that as a New Yorker now, I've lived here 6.5 years. I bought my first season tickets to a WNBA game. I went last year. I had season tickets. I loved every single time I walked into that stadium. I think the community of women's sport is undervalued and it's underappreciated. I think you go to an NBA game to be seen because it's the NBA. You go to a WNBA game or an NWSL because you love that team. And the investment in that team is community-based. So for people out there that are brands, that are advertisers, you're going to get people that absolutely love what they're seeing and what they're a part of. And I think the difference with women's sports as opposed to men's sports is that women's sports, they really are vested and invested in the players, in the teams, in the stories, in their, the drama of some of the stories, and not like bad drama, just like the difficulties of being a woman sometimes, of having kids, of coming back. I mean, tennis, look at all the tennis players that have had children and come back. They're warriors. I see Alexis sitting in the front row over there, Serena. I mean, so I think the one thing, if you are thinking about the oscillation of like, oh, where should I put my money? If you invest in a men's team, you're going to be a tiny little blip on the back of a poster. If you invest in women's sports, you're going to be the whole poster. And they're going to support you, they're going to love you, they're going to get behind your brand. And so for me, investing and being part of women's sports is a community. And so I'm stealing that from Sue Bird, because Sue Bird said it a couple of months ago in Vegas. And when she said the WNBA and the Seattle Storm for her were a community, that's how I feel now about the Liberty. Every time I walk through the gates and I go and see a game, I love it. I love every second of it. So for me, I think the best thing about today is seeing how great women's sports are and also how great we are at networking. So let's support each other. Go to the games. Don't complain about it. Go support. And then you're going to see more and more events like this. And we're not going to have to beg for money, because that's not going to happen anymore, because money is flowing into women's sports. Okay? Because as the T-shirt says, everyone watches women's sports. Thank you, everyone.